Good morning, everyone. My name's Tom Fontana with the Ohio Soybean Council. I want to welcome you all to our virtual field trip today. Really appreciate everyone who's involved with this field trip. Ohio Soybean Council, Education Projects, our partners in Grow Next Gen, our education program. Appreciate Dan from Shiftology, our producer and director today. And most of all, I want to thank uh, Jeff Josfile, who also works with Grow Next Gen, and all the Sunrise folks, Sunrise Cooperative folks who are participating today. Sunrise Cooperative is going to talk to you about science and how it affects soybean harvest. We hope you enjoy it. On behalf of Ohio's 25,000 soybean farmers, thank you for your participation, and I will turn it over to Heather Bryan, our moderator today. Take it away, Heather.
Hey, thanks, Tom. Hey, everybody. How are you guys doing? I am so excited to be here. I'm Heather Bryan, and I'm an educator with grownextgen.org. So today, before we get started, we just have a couple of things to talk about. First, I want to share some housekeeping notes with you so you'll know how to interact with us today. If you're joining with on Zoom, you'll note that the chat is turned off today. So please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom screen so that you can ask your questions. We'll also try to answer as many of those questions as we can. If you're watching on YouTube, please note that the live chat is also turned off. You would need to go back to the Zoom link and join us so that you can ask questions. So let's sit back and let's enjoy what we're going to talk about today. First, again, as Tom mentioned, we want to thank our sponsors. So thank you again to the Ohio Soybean Council, to Grow Next Gen, and of course to Sunrise Cooperative, who is sharing their expertise with us today so that we can learn about soybeans and how they grow in Ohio. So before we get started too, you'll see here in our chat, I've put up there that you'll be able to locate this virtual field trip along with any other ones from Grow Next Gen on grownextgen.org. And so let's get started. So first, I would like to introduce to you Brian Brawmiller. Brian is a Sunrise Cooperative Technical Sales Lead. So hi, Brian. How are you today?
I'm good.
Good. We're so excited that you're here. I know that you have worked in agriculture for your entire life. And so, if you could just briefly describe your career pathway to the job that you have and the education that you received along the way for our students so they could better understand, what you need in order to be effective at your job.
Yeah, so my career, I've worked at several different locations throughout my career. I guess I'll start with my education. I started my education at Ohio State University Agricultural Technical Institute in Worcester, Ohio. There I got a 2-year degree, but then I continued my education down on Ohio State's main campus in Columbus and received my bachelor's um, in agronomy. And then also that led me to my first job, which was an independent agriculture company in kind of north central Ohio. And there I kind of worked from the bottom up, and I worked there for 13 years. I finished when I was managing the location, and I was in charge of all the sales and operations at that location. I went from there and worked at a distributor for about a year and a half, and the opportunity here at Sunrise came up. And kind of what I do here, it's a really fancy title for Southern Technical Sales Lead, but what that entails essentially is just supporting our sellers in the different product lines that we offer. And my main focus is on foliar products, in-furrow products, adjuvants, biologicals, and other biostimulant products. So it's a lot of fun to interact with growers and be the support team to our sellers that they rely on. And some say I'm a self-proclaimed. They say I'm an expert in the field, but I'll let them say that. But
Okay. Well, that
it's a
sounds
lot of fun, and I enjoy it every day.
good. So it sounds like you have found the job that you've been looking for. I think agriculture has a place for just about anybody, no matter what your background is. So thank you for being a part of agriculture so you can support Ohio soybean farmers. I know that before we get started here, we want to start specifically with Sunrise Cooperative, and you're going to tell us just a little bit about Sunrise's history, as well as really what a cooperative is and how you support farmers in Ohio. So if you could do that, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, so Sunrise Sunrise is a cooperative, and if you're not familiar with the cooperative, it's by definition, it's a farm, business, or other organization which is not publicly traded or privately owned. It's owned and run jointly by its members, and those members share in the profits and the benefits within that cooperative. So at the end of the year, every cooperative is different, but they'll pay out a percentage of the profits based on the customer, and they'll pay that back to the customer in a form called patronage. And then another portion of that is kept as equity within the cooperative. So when that individual decides to retire, they can cash in that equity and get paid out on that as well. But Sunrise, we have multiple different streams of revenue. So we handle a lot of grain. We have an energy division and an agronomy division. And the energy division, I guess I'll kind of start there. We handle propane to homeowners, farms, and businesses, as well as fuel, whether it be diesel, gasoline, oil, or any of those fuel products that they need. And then on the agronomy division, everything a farmer needs to grow a crop can run through the agronomy division, whether it be seed or a service of application, the chemistry, the herbicides, the fertilizer, all of that falls under the agronomy. And on the screen, you'll see our South Charleston location, which is one of our largest locations. At the top, there's about a 40,000 ton fertilizer building with a shop. And then also you can see the white cylinders there. Those are fertilizer tanks that hold a multitude of products that are used throughout the year and refilled, along with that large black tank. And those are surrounding what's called a loadout building, essentially. And customers will pull in there and get their trucks filled. And we also store in there all our herbicides and bulk products like that. And then just off the screen, there it is, kind of in the bottom corner. Those are our ammonia tanks. And that's a nitrogen source that farmers use and inject in the soil for corn growth, primarily in Ohio. And that's applied in the spring.
All right, and it looks like here you have several locations in Ohio outside of your South Charleston plant as well. So are these green dots that we see there, those are all of your cooperative extensions for farmers to have access to?
Yeah, so those highlight all of our different locations throughout the state. As you can see, we're kind of clustered together in the northwest and then southwest corners, but outside of those, our coverage area, we reach quite a bit further with our application in the areas that we cover. But those are highlighting all of our different locations, whether it's an energy only location or a grain site or a full service agronomy. And right here at the South Charleston one, we have, there's grain, fertilizer, and then just off the camera view, what you saw in the drone shot was some fuel. But that's just highlighting the different locations around the state of Ohio that we currently have.
All right, well, thank you. It sounds to me like a cooperative really is a one-stop shop for farmers. So you can get the fuel you need, the seed, the fertilizer, the support, et cetera, everything that you might need in order to farm. And what a great idea that the farmers are part owners in that business. So thank you for helping us to understand what a cooperative does. I know that, top of mind for Sunrise is always how can we most support our farmers. So as we move over, we're going to meet both Jeff Goodbar and Jonah Johnson. And so you can see here that Jonah is a sales agronomist with Sunrise Cooperative, and he's our expert today here with us. And so thank you, Jonah, for being a part of today. Could you tell us just a little bit about your educational pathway to become a sales agronomist at Sunrise Cooperative?
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity. Good morning, everybody. So my name is Jonah Johnson. I'm the sales agronomist for Sunrise. And so agronomist, it's a big word, but essentially I like to define what that means. So agronomy is the science of the interaction between soils and crop growth. And there's a lot of different agronomists across the world. If you go overseas, for example, they could be experts in rice production. You could go in the southern part of the U.S., they could be an expert in peanuts and cotton. My expertise would be in corn, wheat, and soybean production here in Ohio. And so my degrees are all in agronomy, undergraduate and postgraduate work, and again, are in agronomy. So it's the science of studying it. And I like to say it's the production of the 4 F's of agriculture. So food, fuel, feed, and fiber. And so that's what our goal is, and ultimately hoping to try to help feed the world. So it's a great occupation to be in.
It sounds like you have a job that is very interesting and perhaps changes every day. Do you like that about your job?
Yes, it helps. It helps keep things interesting. Mother Nature is ultimately the ruler of our world, and so every day is different. We have different tasks at us, and so in part of my role here at Sunrise, I help support about 40 agronomy solution advisors. So they're the consultant sales people that support growers here in Ohio. And so when they have problems and questions, they come to me and hope that we can find a solution to help solve issues or increase production on growers' fields, and we do that collaboratively. So it's a like I said, a great occupation.
Oh, thank you so much. And we also
Thank
have
you.
with us Mr. Jeff Jostable, a teacher, and also an educator for Grow Next Gen. So thank you, Jeff, for being with us today. I know that you are an expert a lot of times in botany and some things like that. So we're really thankful to have you be here today.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much. I am a classroom teacher, mainly biology and environmental science. And my 4-year bachelor's came from Bowling Green State University and a 2-year master program in education from Wright State University. And I've been teaching a long time, and I'm glad to be here to help out today.
Thank you so much, Jeff. So I know that we're going to get started first with just kind of learning more about soybeans in general. And Jonah, I know you are the perfect person to talk to us about how soybeans kind of started, it first started to be a part of a crop here in the United States, and give us a brief history of that.
Yeah, sure. So interesting enough, soybeans first made their way in the United States probably about in the late 1700s, and it was brought over by global explorers at the time. And it was first brought of attention that somebody went into Eastern Asia, into China, and found that they were making soybeans into soy sauce. So what modern day soy sauce is. So today we take condiments for granted. You go to the store and you have a whole slew of different condiments, but back in the early times, something as simple as table salt was considered a delicacy to season our foods. And so when soy sauce was found of interest, that kind of brought more interest of raising soybeans in the US. And it wasn't actually till the 1940s, at the outbreak of World War II, that soybeans came a very large commodity in the US, because the Department of Defense, what they call now, needed basically a high protein food source. They needed lubricants and oils to support the troops overseas. And so that's when it blew up in the US, so to speak, and went over a lot of different acres. And the climate and habitat fit very well to grow soybeans into what we grow today across the whole US and really the whole world. So it's very fascinating, how soybeans have migrated from East Asia into the US and become a very large cash crop.
Oh, I love that history. Thank you for helping us to better understand that. I
You're
also
welcome.
know at one point in time, I think soybeans were used as a forage crop or something like that for cattle, if I remember correctly. So that's
That's
really
exactly right.
cool. Yeah, that's really cool how science discovered additional uses. And
Hmm.
as you guys know, students, soybean is a super high protein crop, super important for livestock feed here in the United States, along with oils. And so we're really glad to be here today. Okay, so I know that you're going to teach us about the soybean plant itself, and I know we have a slide up here that shows an immature plant that has some parts, but I also know you've got some live plants there.
Yeah.
And so I thought that Jeff, I'd let you take it over here and ask Jonah a few questions about soybean anatomy, so our students could be familiar with how that plant grows and produces energy and produces pods.
Yes, we are standing next to a field of soybeans that's pretty much mature, but we have some that are growing pretty avidly right now too. So what we want to do, Jonah, is maybe explain to everybody out there a little bit about the anatomy, from the leaves to the stems to the flowers, how this all takes place in the soybean to get us that protein.
Sure. So soybeans, hence the beans, is a dicot. So if you've had that in your classes yet, monocot versus dicot, our monocots are more of our grasses. So that would be for us, corn and wheat. And a dicot is our soybean plant production, a legume. And so with the basic anatomy, when you have our plants here, you'll see it's dicots are a taproot crop, and that's this structure you see here. And then you'll have auxiliary portions to that plant. Hence, here some more auxiliary stems or roots. And then you have these fine roots here that are all looking for water, nutrition, and also obviously to hold the plant upright as it grows. And so the first thing that happens when a soybean plant essentially emerges, the seed's planted about 1.5 inches in the ground. It takes on water, imbibes water, it germinates, and the hypocotyl, which is essentially the structure here, in its infancy, pulls the soybean seed up above ground and emerges and opens up, and the cotyledons emerge, and those are the first leaves. And so after that process, essentially these roots mature through the growing season and are responsible for sustaining life for our soybean plant. So it's and then of course hedging against Mother Nature, what she throws against us to keep the plant healthy and growing through the season.
Show us the leaves a little bit. They're kind of unique. They're not like a corn plant, which is a monocot plant,
Yep.
and they're arranged very uniquely. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So soybeans, when the plant grows, it's going to want to branch. And so growers will plant in Ohio different row spacings, typically maybe narrow rows, like 7 or 10 inches away from each other, maybe 15s, which is a very popular distance, and then 30s. And so why that's important is because if you think about sitting next to your neighbors in the classroom, if you're very close to each other, you're probably not always very comfortable all the time. And then if you let more room, you got more room to stretch out and relax. And so it's the same thing with a soybean plant. When you give it a little bit more room, it's going to want to branch. And so you have these different branches that protrude off, essentially the main stem. So you'll have, a main branch here, and then you have these structures called petioles that support trifoliates. And so trifoliates, since the name tri means three, and so we have 3 leaves, and at every node you'll have an opportunity to place petioles. And at all these nodes essentially on the soybean leaf, you'll have, once we're gone into the reproduction phase, we have places where pods will mount. So we'll have flowers essentially that form, and then these pods will turn from the flowers once they fertilize themselves and then begin to set seed. And so this happens, the vegetative stages, you can accumulate essentially a growth stage every 5 to 7 days, essentially, if we have adequate moisture and temperature. And then once we get to so many vegetative stages, we'll switch into reproductive stage, hence these flowers you still see on this green soybean plant, and then the reproductive stages begin. So typically in Ohio, soybeans can range from planting to maturity, may take anywhere from 90 to 200 days, depending on the length of the plant, what's pre-programmed in its genetics in that seed. So.
And maybe we can show them here so that they can see at home. Those soybeans are clustered around what you called a node, and it's pretty obvious right here as you look. You can see they're separated by that stem material there. So,
yep.
So what kind of challenges do farmers face as they watch and wait for the soybean crop to grow after they have it planted?
Sure. So as we're all well aware, as we go through the seasons of life, essentially, in the spring, typically we plant, and what we want to happen at planting is soils to be at least 50 degrees, dry enough to support equipment to drive over it, have adequate moisture essentially to sustain that seed, to imbibe moisture, to germinate and to grow. And so as you're well aware that how we don't like being super cold, at least I don't, in the spring, we can incur variation in weather. And so when you get the ups and downs of temperature, you get a lot of rain events. The soil conditions below ground to these roots, this developing plant, essentially, there's a lot of things that can negatively impact that plant, like different pathogens. You can have different insects that live below the ground, and they could be chewing on these plant roots and essentially damage that plant and hinder it from growing successfully. So it's no different in us as we enter flu season here, as we're coming into fall and winter. Our bodies are always battling, a similar type of avenue of protecting ourselves. Same thing with the plant. So the goal is to hope that we get above ground as quickly as possible, and that plant essentially starts growing and gets established so it can defend itself and grow successfully like we hope it would. So,
well, as an agronomist, maybe we'll speak to insects first. What do you tell a farmer that comes and says, I think I have some insect issues? What do I need to do to get this crop to maturity?
Sure. So, insects and weeds are our biggest, and then of course, pathogens, disease are all issues that we battle every year. And so, in regards to insects, if you have a below ground pest, we have seed treatments that'll help protect that. So essentially a seed treatment is if you picture taking like a seed and we can put coatings on there. So I relate it back to something as simple as if you've ever colored Easter eggs and you dip the egg in your color, and the more dips, the more color it gets, right? So we can actually coat our seed in different chemistries, whether it's an insecticide, a fungicide to help deter pathogens, and that seed will be coated. And when that seed germinates, it gets water, the roots will uptake that solution and essentially will take it up in the plant and help protect. So if a bug starts chewing on the plant, it'll help kill the bug. And if a pathogen starts to try to chew on the roots and try to make it sick, and then the plant gets sick and perhaps may die, those fungicides can help protect against that as well. So the science behind all that, in the last 20 years has evolved vastly to how we can make our plants give them a much better shot, out of the ground versus them being untreated and just at Mother Nature's hand.
If it's okay, I'm going to jump in here just really quick. It sounds to me that as an agronomist, Jonah, you're doing a job where you're looking at all aspects of the growth of that plant and helping to, have farmers, have the best yield that they possibly can. And I heard that you mentioned this word seed coatings
Mhm.
and also chemistries. So when we're thinking about students and careers, the chemistry, chemical engineering, all of those things are really important to how we support agriculture and farmers in Ohio. And I know that Brian is going to help talk us through a seed coating process here in the video that we're going to watch right now. So Brian, if you can you help to explain what we're seeing on the screen here and maybe what some of those seed coatings might do to help the plant?
Yeah, so in that video on your screen, this is a very small scale treater. And what we were doing in this video, we were actually treating the seed. It's our plot seed. So in a plot, it's a very small scale, typically an acre or two is where that seed will go. And what he injected there was essentially a fungicide insecticide product. And it's got a colorant on it, which just changes the color of the seed. And that's the coating. So you essentially want your seed coated in that material. And like Jonah said, that'll protect that seed while it's underground and from the pathogens and the insects. And we do that on a small scale in this video, but also it can be done on a much larger scale as well and in a production facility.
And when we're seeing as they're putting another product on, so could you technically put more than one seed coating on a soybean seed?
Yeah, so the product that we just dumped in there, that's more of a lubricant product. And what that product does is it's very dusty, and you can see the dust coming off right there. What that does is it helps to dry that liquid that we put in, and also to help that seed flow better within the planter, and also getting it out of the seed tender or the wagon that's taken to the field so that it flows into the planter and also comes out of the planter and doesn't plug anything up.
Well, I think that's a really important aspect, right, of soybean farming is that when you're planting them, part of the big risk is making sure you put the seed in the right place so it has the best ability to germinate and to pop up out of the soil, right? So it's interesting that maybe some of the things you're putting on these seeds are not just fungicides and herbicides, but instead things that help with the technical side, the engineering aspect of farming as well.
Correct. It's so important because I've been on all ends of it, and one of the worst phone calls you can get from a grower is, "Hey, my seed isn't coming out or it's plugging up." And we take a lot of care and effort here at Sunrise to do a lot of stuff on our end so that they can simply just get the seed, put it in their planter, and drive across the field, and it flows very well coming out, and it's dry, and it's evenly coated.
So I know that we have another video after this one that shows more of a large scale process. So do you coat seeds, per the farmer's request? Like, does a farmer have a say in the seed coatings that they receive on their seeds in a larger scale if they're planting a big field versus just a plot field like we saw before?
Yeah, so what you see in this video is it's a commercial scale, and typically we have outdoor seed bins that are fed through a belt into this treater, and it's a very small amount of liquid that it takes really to coat those seeds. And to answer your question, yes, the farmer has a say in what they get. We have a plethora of packages they can choose from, depending on their field conditions. If they're soybeans after soybeans, they may want a different protection than if they're in a rotation with corn, soybeans. And they can also choose if they want more of a premium treatment where it has a fungicide and an insecticide, or we have a standard option where they can just get a fungicide, but then you can, excuse me, you can upgrade that as well to add additional protection for different fungicides. And then some of the standard stuff that we just put on all of them that are treated is that lubricant that you saw, so that it helps dry them, because depending on the time of year and the humidity, it can have a difference in how they come out of that treater. And we'll treat into the box. We can treat into semi trucks. We can treat into a seed tender. There's a multitude of different ways that you can handle that seed coming out, and it's a very fast process nowadays as to what it used to be.
Okay, thank you. And I know that in addition to this, we're going to take a look at some of the products that you have developed at Sunrise specifically. So I know that we have a product called Bio STNR, and later we're going to look at a product called Overtreatment. And these are additions to things like fungicides, et cetera. But instead, they also have, if I remember reading on there, like they help to promote vigor. So maybe they have some nutrients, microbials. I thought, Jeff and Jonah, if you could talk just a little bit about how these support soybean farmers to help increase yield and hybrid vigor of those soybeans, that would be great.
Sure. So a lot of words just got mentioned there, and it might be a little confusing. So when we talk about microbials, they're microscopic bacteria that you need a microscope essentially to see, with your bare eye. And so we've scientists over the years have developed and figured out when they found soybean plants that were aggressive and grew really successfully in the crops, they would culture the soil and figure out what's down there that's supporting this exorbitant amount of additional growth where maybe they didn't reside. And so when you think about these root systems here, we can apply in that seed treatment, like Brian mentioned, a coating that is also taking up that plant. And so these bacteria, essentially, they have a relationship with these plant roots. So these plant roots produce sugars through the whole growing season. And when we can direct these specific bacteria to live and they feed on those sugars, and in return, it's a handshake agreement that says, the plant says arbitrarily, if you help me, and I'll let you live in my roots, and we'll feed you through the whole growing season. So it's a great aspect. And so these microbials can help with early season germination. So when you get in these cold, wet environments in the early spring in Ohio, these plants struggle to emerge because it's cold. And like I said, if you remember, we need 50 degrees or warmer for germination to initiate. And so these microbials can actually trigger that plant to say, hey, I'm cool with these current conditions. I can help you germinate quicker. I can help make nutrients that are surrounding that seed to be more available to that plant. And also help these roots grow quicker and tap into those reserves that the soil holds for us to support these plants through its life cycle. So essentially it's a boost, a quick jump start to help these plants be successful from the very beginning. And so this is all a very new evolving science, and it's very exciting to see how we can use something, a natural source, and give it to that plant, and it makes it so much more successful in its growth.
That's really cool. So, in your career history, Jonah, I just heard you say that this is a new and evolving science. So,
Mm-hmm.
over your career history, have you been able to see science that has really increased yield, productivity of soybeans? We all know that arable land is shrinking
Mm-hmm.
worldwide. And so, I know that farmers have a huge challenge of producing more food and less land. So, are these one of the tools that are in our toolbox that could help us to be successful in the future?
Absolutely. So as Heather mentioned, there's more pavement and less tillable soils to plant our plants in and farmers to grow and feed the world essentially. And so these are, from 20 years ago, the seed treatments was revolutionary. Every single year, soybean breeders that are plant breeders that figure out ways to cross males and females that its offspring is more successful, whether it can take the environment better, it can grow in different areas of the United States or across the world essentially, and deal with the weather, the environment, and produce more with less essentially, do less with grow better with less water, less nutrition. Breeders are all looking at that. And then of course, all the disease and everything that Mother Nature throws, how that plant can defend itself and be more successful. So really the biological is something that's very new in the last 5, 6, 7 years. And, the scientists are evolving and finding more and more of these bacteria that are beneficial that we can incorporate with plant growth. And so that, right now, that is the hottest button thing. And I think it's something that is just going to keep prospering along with nutrition that we can put on that seed as well to sustain that plant when it's a baby till it gets these adult roots that are, essentially supporting this plant for growth. So.
Another question that a lot of times comes up if you're studying soil or you're dealing with growing a crop in agriculture is rhizobia.
Mm-hmm.
How does that fit into this picture that we were talking about with root growth and so forth?
Absolutely. So Rhizobia japonicum is a very specific bacteria that is in the soil, but more or less needs to be reintroduced. We've been finding with some recent new soil tests that it was thought once before that it resided in the soil and there'd be enough the next year to reinfect our plants. And so why this specific bacteria is really important is that if you zoom in here, you can see these little round spherical structures. And so those are called soybean nodules. And so what these nodules do, the bacteria infect these roots, they live on the roots, and as for them to essentially pay their rent to live on the plant all growing season, they produce nitrogen. So if you've not studied like macronutrients in plant and human health, macronutrients are essentially nutrients that are needed in large amounts. So nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium are three major macronutrients. In regards to the nitrogen component, typically dicots or legumes do not need nitrogen applied to them via like fertilizer, but it's because every legume has a very specific bacteria that can help create these nodules. And so, a high producing soybean crop can need almost 400 pounds per acre through the growing season of nitrogen to support that plant. And so whether that's supplied through these nodules or through the soil, through organic matter that resides in those different soils, and that all varies across the entire globe, essentially based on soil types and taxonomy, et cetera. But that's a very important structure to, our soybean production, is making sure we have plenty of these on the roots. And granted, there's a lot more root structure that when we dug these didn't make it out of the ground because it gets so large, but it's extremely important in the soybean growth. And so that is another major ingredient that we put on our seed treatment to help inoculate that plant from birth, essentially, so it has that early season vigor and growth, and it's supported by all the nutrition it needs, right out the gate, and it's not waiting for it that could make it deficient.
Well, let's continue on that thought a second with the nitrogen. What if the plant does not get enough nitrogen? And I think we have a slide that shows nitrogen deficiency in soybeans. What goes on?
So, unfortunately, our plants don't talk to us verbally, right? But I'd like to say that the plants tell us a lot based on and things that we've been trained off for many decades of studying agronomy, is that you can look at the color, the architecture, the way the plant grows tells us a lot. You just got to recognize the symptoms, so to speak. And so when you get nitrogen deficiency, so whether you have, let's say we had a cold, wet spring and this bacteria, let's say it did not survive, or the inoculation process was interrupted by something, and it didn't have enough nitrogen needed, these plants essentially will turn a peaked yellow color, and that's usually a major indicator of nitrogen deficiency. Now, a lot of other nutrients and micronutrients, those are nutrients needed in small amounts, can also turn the plant different colors. So we have to use a lot of deductive reasonings, whether if we can do it visually or send it to a laboratory for analysis, and they can actually tell us exactly what nutrient concentration is in the plant. But when we have those environments, we usually can dig plants, because I always tell our sellers that always have a shovel with you, because there's so much we can learn underground versus just from the above ground symptoms. So if the nodules don't form, and organic matter, which is another ingredient in the soil that provides nitrogen to the soybean plant, if the bacteria is not breaking that down and providing it to the plant, that all can lead to early season deficiencies. A lot of times they can recoup and fix themselves later in the growing season, but early on, those can be major deficits to the plant for a very high yielding crop.
So do those nodules grow immediately as the plant grows? And do your seed coatings help with that? Or do they come later during the life cycle?
Great question. So typically in the past, before a lot of these bacteria were realized as how beneficial are, and we could incorporate those in the plant from essentially germination, they would naturally find those in the soil. If there was any left from the previous soybean crop, it might have been corn the year before and soybeans the year prior. That's our typical rotation in Ohio. And so it would find that bacteria, it would infect these plants, but there's a period of time it takes for that to happen. So it could be, V3, V4, V5 in its early season vegetative growth stages. So you're talking about a soybean plant that may be this tall till this infection occurs. And so when we incorporate this on our seed treatments, the infection essentially occurs, the second roots start to germinate in the soil. And so that speeds up, and we've seen plants, this small, if you will, that already had nodules and is so far ahead in the game than plants that are waiting, a month till this infection occurs.
So just to jump in here really quick, I know as we're moving through how soybeans grow in Ohio, there is additional things that we do in agriculture to help soybeans reach their best productivity. I see in the field behind you, you have some mature soybeans. And, one of the things that I remember you saying, Jonah, is that these were planted on 30-inch rows. I know in northwestern Ohio, farmers plant sometimes in 15-inch rows. And I know in past history, farmers have also planted soybeans in as little as 8-inch rows. Can you talk a little bit about how just that engineering aspect of farming changes how soybeans might grow, and what might be the advantage to different row spacings to grow soybeans in Ohio?
Sure. So if you recall from our discussion, about the row spacings where if I'm very close to you in your classroom, like your buddy is right next to you, shoulder to shoulder, versus you giving them some space to stretch out and breathe, so to speak, that all changes the physical architecture of a soybean plant. Now, soybean breeders can breed plants to whether or not, like this example, a more bushy type style, which means your stems will lean out and take advantage of that spacing, or they may be more upright plants and always be straight up in the air, if you will. And so that all is can be heavily influenced by the amount of seed per acre you plant, but also the inner row spacing. So you have your rows planted in linear rows, and that interlinear row spacing is what we're talking about here. And so when you give it space, older beans, like 10 years ago, they would get really, really tall, and this nodal spacing between these nodes, so that's this distance between these nodes, this gap might essentially be from my pointer finger all the way up here, and there'd be nothing but just a big stem. And so as breeders improve the characteristic of the soybean, but also we figured out how to manage row spacing, that now you can see how densely these nodes are, and that's what you want to have a maximum yielding crop. Because if we only had a few pods here and a few pods here, then you can see all these pods potential that we lost. And so when you give the beans, we found a happy medium of 15-inch row beans is really popular because of the planting of them. And then of course the spacing between their neighbors makes the bean a successful crop. So that's kind of the basic gist of it. It gets a lot more deeper, but I'll save you the exorbitant details.
It sounds like there's just a lot of science that's involved in growing soybeans, both from the
very
genetics
much
of
so.
the genetics of the soybean, and that soil might actually be kind of like a warfare zone there as that seed is placed in there and trying to germinate, because there's other organisms, et cetera, that live down there that are trying to take advantage of that soybean too. And so thank goodness for agronomists and for scientists and engineers and everything else that are helping us to improve how our soybeans are produced in Ohio.
Absolutely.
I did want to make sure that we kind of just reached back into our slide deck here and talked just a little bit about some of those treated and untreated seeds, and just really help to bring to light those two treatments that you've created there at Sunrise, the Bio STNR and then the over treatment. If possible, maybe we can see some of those slides where you can kind of compare a treated to a non-treated seed. So I see on the screen right now, you can see where some of the roots are longer. The color is a deeper green, for example. I know we also have a slide that has those 3 images there that are on it, so that we can show students how these seed treatments really can improve soybean growth. So we're looking at a slide right now, Jonah, that has the check, so what we would call, our control in science class, and then the Bio ST, and then the over treatment on the far right. And you can see kind of a progression. I know, Brian, you can also see this slide, so maybe you can help Jonah here. But can you talk just a little bit about those products and how they're able to improve the growth of those soybeans, so students better understand how this science is improving yield overall?
Sure. So as these coatings, we figured out over time, adding, if you compound your treatment analysis, so you do A plus B plus C, and does that actually improve ultimate yield? And not, it's like, if I keep adding gasoline to the fire, will it make the fire bigger and hotter? Yes, but maybe not always. And so it's the same thing in agriculture. If you probably done experiments in your classroom and saw that different things you did, like a treatment that you incurred upon the plant, let's say you're growing or whatever, may have not been done what you hoped the hypothesis outcome was. And so it was figured out by a lot of field trials and scientists that figured out that, number one, we've isolated what we think would make the bean successful, and then 2, when to add it, and then what could be compounded and added in succession. So can we add 3, 4, 5, 6 different things at once in those seed treaters, if we go back to that example, and will that help the bean? Because sometimes 2 chemistries may counteract each other and not work, or something may happen to them in a negative fashion that either doesn't help the plant, or just the whole process that Brian mentioned, the logistics of them successfully getting treated, delivered to the field, into the planter, and then into the soil. There's a lot of mechanical things that happen in that process, and if something's interrupted, you don't have a successful crop. And so when you see these compounded treatments in the images that you're seeing, we found that through those succession of adding those all together, it's made the plant incrementally better in its performance early on, and then of course setting itself up for success for the rest of the growing season.
Thank you so much. I hope the students are seeing that there is just, again, so much science that's involved in the production of food here in Ohio. And, as we're kind of like looking forward, I'm curious what your thoughts are. We had a big drought in Ohio this year. How do you think overall soybeans were able, looking at the field behind you, to handle that drought? With the new genetics and all of the opportunities between chemistries and the technical, side of it. What do you think or kind of predict for a yield here in Ohio?
So yeah, so if for us in Ohio, if you're not in Ohio, we've had about 5 to 6 weeks essentially with no rain, and so we had an astronomical amount of rain from spring all the way through summer, and never really needing rain essentially. And obviously that's great for crop growth, but it's great for pathogen growth too, and insects prosper. When the heat's coupled onto that, and so one way once we've entered that essentially moderate drought conditions in Ohio, what happens is that most soybeans, I switched plants here. I took all the petioles and leaves off so you can see this is a smaller plant, not as vigorous as that previous plant, but you can see where all the nodes are set. And most of the beans yield will be in this middle canopy essentially. And so one way we can tell when stress hits the plant is judging pods and seeds at the top. And so typically what happens, we'd like to see 3, 4, and even the highly coveted 5 soybean seeds per pod, which is still somewhat rare. But obviously the more seeds we have per plant, the higher the yield potential. And so what happens is under stress is that as these beans at the top, the plant realizes, okay, I'm under stress, I can't sustain enough moisture and nutrients to all these. Then they'll start to draw back. So they may only put, like in this example, there's a 3 bean pod, but this seed here is pretty much non-existent where my thumbnail is. And you have these 2 seeds. So they won't fill the pods completely. You may have a 1 bean pod, or they may drop the flowers that, set up here later where these are already setting pods, and you may have nothing in the upper canopy. And so that's one way that we can, visually tell, okay, this crop is potentially not going to be as high yielding potential. Then also the next thing we look at is seed size. And so if you crudely use the analogy of comparing like basketballs to baseballs, the softballs, the soccer balls, etc. That's how we can look at seed size. Some soybeans produce different seed size from its genetics, but also based on the growing season. So we may have really large seeds here in the middle, but maybe have little BB size seeds at the top. And that again is all based on how many resources are available to that plant through the growing season, and was it ever in want of anything. And so in years that you had, timely rains through the whole growing season, you may have 4 and 5 bean pods all the way to the top and really large seed. And that's a way you can gauge how successful. So for us here in Ohio, there's going to be some pretty good beans, but there's going to also be some beans that were stressed because of that absence of water through the growing season.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful. So just thinking about the future of soybeans and your history, your career history, both Brian and Jeff and Jonah. What I'm curious about is like, what do you potentially see in the future that might be coming along to help with soybean yield? So, what do you anticipate as we're moving forward that science might do to help improve soybean yield?
So I'll just dive in and start the answer. So in my opinion, I think there's going to be more microbiology that we can add into to help our soil health. Soil health is, we've had measures of soil for years, whether it's chemical or physical, and I relate that back. Physical measurement is something as simple as compaction. A farmer drove through a wet spot in the field with large tires. It squeezed that soil, so that's a physical measurement. Chemistry is when we send soil to the lab for analysis for our nutrient analysis and the pH or the acidity or alkalinity of the soil. Biology is a rather new science where they can actually tell how many microbes are living around our plants, what the microbes are, and then we can isolate those and tell it what it's doing for the plant. So that's a very new science, and that's extremely exciting. So more biological activity that we can incorporate with our plants, more nutritional, more things that we can add to that plant early on to help that plant sustain itself when there's just not that is not provided in the soil naturally. So those things are, I think, what we're going to see is going to help soybean growth. Not to mention the genetics. The breeders are always, and when you look over a long period of time of a growth over time, it's about 0.6 to 0.8 bushels per year that genetics offer us on over a long period of time. Where in corn, it's probably 10 to 20 bushel increments as new hybrids come out. So there's science from all different disciplines to help our plants be successful. So it's a very exciting time in agriculture.
Thank you so much. I know that we are coming to a close here with our virtual field trip. We're just about at 45 minutes, so that's where we like to end. But I want to just say again that there are a lot of tools in the toolbox now for farmers to produce crops here in Ohio and around the world. And thank you again to Sunrise Cooperative for being incredibly knowledgeable and helping our students to understand how these tools are making soybean yield higher, better, more efficient. What an exciting time really to work in agriculture. So students, if you have any career interest, or you have some questions, please submit later on and we'd be happy to help answer those. So as we come to a close, I just again want to thank everybody from Sunrise Cooperative. So thank you, Jonah. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff, for being our expert on site there to help facilitate and digging up all those amazing plants.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So remember, please, that you can see this virtual field trip and all other field trips for Grow Next Gen on grownextgen.org. Tom, would you like to say anything before we exit out?
I don't think so, Heather. Thanks everybody for participating today, and you already thanked our presenters today from Sunrise. So everybody go to grownextgen.org. There are lots of educational materials there for use in the classroom and for students to investigate careers. So thanks everybody very much.
Yeah, you guys were really excellent today. Thank you again. Have a wonderful day, everybody.